This is lesson 812, the Age of Absolute Monarchs. And our big question here is, how did European kings gain so much power? Of course, it took them a long time to do this, it took generations. But keep in mind that by the end of the Renaissance, which we've studied, new nations were forming in Europe. Many of these nations were ruled by powerful kings with unlimited power, and these powerful kings were known as absolute monarchs or absolutists. The era from 1600 to the mid 1700s was known as the Age of Absolutism. Back in the Middle Ages, which we studied last semester, European kings had not been very powerful. Instead, feudal lords, remember them? They had the real power because they controlled the local manners and they had the loyalty of their knights that were below them. The Catholic Church was the dominant religion in Europe, and the Pope had a lot of power over all believers, powerful and not so powerful. The Crusades had stimulated trade and led to the rise of cities in Europe. And this trade sparked the Renaissance and weakened the power of those feudal lords. Here's the city of Florence. As feudalism declined, the power of kings increased to fill that power vacuum. The power of the Catholic Church also weakened as a result of the papal schisms that we spent a little bit of time talking about, and the Protestant Reformation that we spent a lot of time talking about. And likewise, as the power of the church began to decline, the power of kings increased to fill that vacuum as well. During the 100 Years' War, new weapons like the cannon and the longbow weakened the power of nobles and knights. Here's what I'm talking about. Cannons could destroy castles, and a commoner with a longbow could penetrate a knight's armor, and he could fire quite rapidly. Thus, these weapons seriously undermined the entire feudal system, the entire feudal society. And as nobles and knights declined, the power of kings increased. The rise of absolute monarchs. During the 100 Years' War, European kings won the right to tax the people directly and routinely as a matter of emergency, because the war was one big non-stop 100-year emergency. During the Renaissance, European kings also had more rich merchants and bankers to whom they could sell noble titles and government offices, and kings used this income to build powerful armies for themselves. Some monarchs used overseas exploration to gain colonies and increase their wealth and power through those colonies. Also, monarchs used their new income and their power to build large, sophisticated, centralized governments to control their nations directly. By the year 1600, some European kings had become absolute monarchs. For example, you had Philip II of Spain, Louis XIV of France, Maria Theresa of Austria, Frederick the Great of Prussia, and Peter the Great of Russia. Absolute monarchy is a government in which one king holds all the power within the country. Absolute monarchs controlled all aspects of their nations, including the taxes, the religion, the military, and the economy. Absolute monarchs believed in a concept called the divine right of kings, and that was the idea that God created the monarchy, and kings answered only to God, not the people. And if you'll recall, the Enlightenment, which we just studied, was partly an answer to that concept. Don't forget John Locke, who said that power comes from the people. Let's take a look at an example of a country that had an absolute monarch. That country was Spain, and the monarch was Philip II. And here is some vocabulary that we're going to explore this unit that's associated with Spain. Some of this vocabulary is in this very presentation. Habsburgs, Catholic, Inquisition, wealth, armada, religion, and inflation. Spain's most famous absolute monarch was Philip II. Philip II ruled Spain from the year 1556 to the year 1598, and he was from the very famous, very powerful, very wealthy, and very Catholic Habsburg family of rulers. Philip II's dad had been Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor who had declared Martin Luther an outlaw back in the year 1519. Philip II's accomplishments. As king, Philip II controlled Spain, the Netherlands, and colonies in America. Philip II also claimed the throne of Portugal right next door in the year 1581. His mom was a Portuguese princess. And Philip II took Portugal and its colonies in Africa and India. And as we know, these colonies were substantial. Philip II also conquered large areas of Italy. This brought Spain great wealth, which Philip II used to build a strong army and also to build the Spanish Armada. Philip II was also a staunch defender of Catholicism, and he used his Spanish Armada to defend Catholicism by finally defeating the seemingly unbeatable Ottoman Turks at the Battle of Lepanto in the year 1571. Philip II also used his Spanish Armada to, quote, defend Catholicism against the English Protestants in the year 1588. Philip II's Spanish Armada unsuccessfully attacked Protestant England. In fact, the attack was a disaster for Spain. This is Philip II's palace, El Escorial. The decline of Spain. Despite his leadership, Spain's fortunes actually declined during Philip II's rule. The Spanish discovered huge natural deposits of silver in their South American territory. They brought 16,000 tons of silver to Spain, and this influx of silver led to massive inflation and prices soared throughout Europe. Another problem, Spain did not manufacture much of anything that it could sell. Spain's manufacturing middle class was tiny, and it's the middle class people who do all of the industry, the business, and the commerce. Spain's nobility tended to consider business to be beneath their dignity. Thus, Spain was really bad at mercantilism. If you'll remember mercantilism, France and England were both much better at it. For example, Spain allowed its people and its colonies to buy from foreign countries. And this made other countries richer at Spain's expense. Some of these countries were actually Spain's adversaries. Also, huge numbers of young, able-minded, able-bodied Spaniards entered economically unproductive professions. There were thousands of monasteries in Spain. Also, the Netherlands broke away from Spain in the year 1579. Finally, inbreeding ended the Spanish Habsburg dynasty in the year 1700. Philip II was a Habsburg, and years of Habsburg inbreeding, in order to keep all the wealth and all the power in the family, had produced the famous Habsburg protruding chin. This is a picture of Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, who was physically and mentally feeble because of all the inbreeding. How bad was the Habsburgs' inbreeding actually? How far did it go? Let's take a look. Charles II's mother was a niece of Charles' father. Maria Anna was his aunt and also his grandmother. Margaret of Austria was his grandmother and his great-grandmother. And finally, the inbreeding was so bad, and this is a very good indication of just how bad it was. His 8 great-grandparents were all descendants of the same couple, Joanne and Philip I of Castile.